Killed for her kind heart, Celeste Mano, infatuation, indignation, and uncontrolled passion led to the death of a beautiful 23-year-old young lady who went about doing her work diligently and dispassionately. But Louis Sacco, after being sacked from his workplace, became obsessed with Celeste, and the obsession led to committing an irreversible crime.
Former co-worker to death in her bed has been sentenced to 36 years behind bars.
Celeste Mano, who was born on November 22, 1996, to her parents Tony Mano and Aggie DiMauro, grew up in a close-knit family with a younger brother named Alessandro and an elder half-brother named Jaden, loved her family, and was especially close to her extended relatives. At age 23, Celeste was beautiful, talented, and intelligent. Everyone who came in contact with her felt drawn by her laughter, and her big smile always lighted any room she entered. Celeste was passionate about dancing, and she loved it. She enjoyed the company of friends and always enjoyed life to the fullest. The beautiful Celeste worked as a team leader at a telephone call center in Melbourne. It was no news at her workplace that she was dedicated to her job and known for her leadership skills. Celeste recently started a relationship with her boyfriend Chris Ridsdale, and they worked in the same company. Even though their relationship was new, they shared a close bond and enjoyed spending time together. As a team lead, Celeste had to escort a colleague who had just been relieved of his duties out of the company in June 2019. She felt sympathy for the man, so she showed him kindness by extending her arms and wishing him well. Little did Celeste know that this act of kindness was going to sow the seed that would eventually lead to her death. Before going, the man unexpectedly kissed her cheek in gratitude. This left Celeste embarrassed and bothered by his actions, prompting her to confide in her mother, Aggie, about what had happened. Aggie, however, didn't view the incident as alarming and suggested that perhaps the man had a crush on Celeste all along and she just wasn't aware. Out of the blues, the dismissed employee, Louis Sacco, unexpectedly reached out to Celeste on Instagram a few days after he was laid off from work. The woman found this a bit disturbing. Sacco, who was born in 1984 in Iraq to Christian parents and is now 35 years old, had a complex background. He migrated with his family to Australia in 1992 when they were granted a humanitarian visa, passing through a Turkish refugee camp. He was the eldest of 5 children and grew up in Roxburgh Park with his family, a suburb in Melbourne's north. What began as a friendly message quickly escalated into a flood of numerous messages per day. Celeste's unease grew as Sacco's persistent messages continued. Despite the woman's clear lack of interest and attempts to ignore him, Sacco kept bombarding her with messages, professing his feelings for her. Celeste only knew the man for a short time. She barely had interactions with him at work, and the longest time she ever spent with him was the day he was dismissed from their workplace. So she found his actions even more alarming and unwarranted. Sacco's messages ranged from poetic expressions of love to alarming claims that he couldn't function, eat, or sleep due to his infatuation with Celeste. Celeste tried all she could to block him on Instagram, but he kept coming back with different accounts. This pattern deeply unsettled Celeste and her family, particularly her mother, Aggie. This situation unsettled Celeste's mother, Aggie. She became increasingly concerned after realizing that the man knew Celeste's home address. The persistent harassment continued unabated for 6 months. Aggie became particularly agitated by one specific message from the man that no longer appeared to be a declaration of love, but rather conveyed anger and hostility. This shift in tone heightened their fears and prompted them to seek help from authorities. They reported the matter to the authorities, but it was rather unfortunate that the police did not view Sacco's actions as any threat. The authorities advised Celeste to simply ignore the messages, despite her explaining that she had already been doing so without success. The police only suggested that Celeste should avoid social media if she didn't like the messages. The police's action of inaction agitated Celeste and her mother. Sacco grew bolder in his stalking trade and became increasingly threatening. He was seen parked outside Celeste's workplace and began following her, figuring out where she lived. His Instagram messages also became explicit as days went by. visualizing what he wanted to do to her, and it was in the most vulgar. Alarmed, Aggie and Celeste returned to the police, this time encountering an officer who took their concerns seriously. When the officer learned that they sought help 6 months earlier without success, he expressed his disappointment in the previous report's mishandling. The officer advised them to obtain an intervention order immediately. This order aimed to legally prohibit Sako from contacting Celeste or approaching her in any way. On August 4, 2020, authorities served Sako with a personal safety intervention order, providing a temporary respite from his nonstop stalking. For a brief period, the intervention worked, though it was short-lived. 11 days after the restraining order was served to him, he confronted Celeste with a 3-page letter via Instagram. This was a clear violation of the orders he had been served. The message left Celeste so frightened that she couldn't bear to read it herself. She immediately forwarded it to the police officer who had been assisting her. In the letter, Sako pleaded with Celeste to withdraw the intervention order and the charges against him for stalking. He claimed that ending the legal proceedings would bring them both peace and allow them to move forward without conflict. Aggie was shocked and dismayed by Sako's blatant breach of the intervention order, which further highlighted the danger he posed to Celeste's safety. As a result of this violation, the police took action and arrested Sako. He faced a serious charge of attempting to pervert the course of justice, which carried a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. After his arrest, Celeste experienced temporary relief from the man's relentless stalking for 3 months. During this period, she made efforts to regain a sense of normalcy and move forward with her life. On November 15, 2020, Celeste and her boyfriend Chris enjoyed a date in Fitzroy in Melbourne's north, where they took a photo together. Feeling comfortable and happy in her new relationship, Celeste decided to publicly share the photo on her Instagram profile. Had she known what awaited her, she would not have shared the photo. Celeste and her mother spent time watching a movie that night, and Celeste also took time to make plans for her upcoming birthday party, which was just a week away. When bedtime came, Aggie bid her daughter goodnight and asked if she wanted the lights left on. Celeste agreed, planning to turn them off shortly. That was the last time Aggie and Celeste said, "I love you" to one another. In the early hours of the 16th of November 2020, just before 4 a.m., Aggie was awakened by the sound of breaking glass. Immediately, she rushed to her daughter's room, calling out Celeste's name in panic. Upon entering, Aggie was confronted with the sight of shattered glass covering the floor. She didn't understand what was happening. Aggie saw blood everywhere, and Celeste was severely wounded. Desperate to save her daughter, she tried to move Celeste from the bed, but she hesitated, not wanting to drop her onto the glass-covered floor. Paramedics arrived at the scene and found. Aggie fights to save her daughter's life, begging Celeste not to leave her. While that was happening, a paramedic discovered a knife, declaring that it was a crime scene. It was then that Aggie realized what had transpired. What? Oh my God, he killed her. The paramedics asked her if she knew who was responsible for the attack, to which Aggie confirmed that Celeste had been stalked by one person. Meanwhile, Sako drove himself to the police station and surrendered. Due to his injuries, Sako was transported to the hospital, where he underwent surgery for his bleeding hands. Sako's family, whom he had been living with since his dismissal, claimed no knowledge of his obsession with his former colleague. They described him as a loner and an introvert who mostly stayed in his room, rarely interacting with others. Upon learning that Sako had turned himself in, Aggie suspected his motive was to plead mental impairment as a defense. Her suspicions were confirmed during the investigation and court proceedings when Sako claimed he was under the influence of hallucinations. He said he had visions of an ugly, pointy-toothed man named Isha and another man with a big nose and large ears who purportedly encouraged him to commit the heinous act. Despite Sako's assertions of mental distress, 4 psychiatrists dismissed his claims, concluding that he was fabricating the hallucinations. They unanimously agreed that Sako was aware of the wrongfulness of his actions at the time of the attack. Some hours after Celeste publicly shared a photo with her new boyfriend, Louis Sako armed himself with the same hammer and kitchen knife that he bought after his release. He used them to smash through Celeste's window and launched the brutal attack. He viciously stabbed Celeste 23 times despite her attempts to defend herself. It happened in only under 3 minutes before the man fled the scene. The evidence presented in court strongly suggested that Sako's attack on Celeste was premeditated. Sako's lawyer, Tim Marsh, acknowledged the existence of some premeditation, but argued that his client's mental state in the months leading up to the murder was complex and unstable. Marsh emphasized that Sako's extreme personality disorders played a significant role in the offense, contributing to diminished moral accountability. Still, after failing to substantiate his claims of hallucinations with psychiatrists, Sako eventually pleaded guilty to murdering Celeste. Aggie, along with Celeste's father, Tony, and brother Alessandro, attended the court proceedings. It was their first encounter with the man responsible for Celeste's death, an experience Aggie described as one of the most challenging in her life. In February 2024, 3 years following the incident, Louis Sako was sentenced to 36 years in prison with a non-parole period of 30 years for the murder of Celeste Mano. Justice Jane Dixon determined that Sako would be eligible for parole in 2050. Justice Dixon acknowledged Sako's mental illnesses but emphasized that they did not excuse his actions against Celeste. She noted that the man likely experienced intermittent thoughts of homicide leading up to the murder, with the photo of Celeste and her boyfriend serving as the final trigger for his violent behavior. While anger and jealousy were contributing factors, Justice Dixon explained that Sako's motives were further complicated by his problematic personality traits, which severely impaired his judgment. Justice Dixon indicated that if Sako had not pleaded guilty, she would have imposed a harsher sentence of 40 years in prison with a non-parole period of 36 years. Celeste's family and her boyfriend expressed disappointment with the court's decision, feeling that the murderer deserved a life sentence for his actions. Celeste had dreams like any other 23-year-old. She doesn't get a second chance. So, I'm supposed to be okay with him getting a second chance, even when he's released from parole? No. The fact that Celeste had to go through it for as long as she did was a crime in itself. Things could have been done so much sooner before they escalated to the point that they did, and then Celeste might have been still sitting here today. Following the sentencing, Celeste's family and friends gathered at her grave to pay their respects and honor her memory. Aggie publicly declared that the system had failed Celeste over 3 years ago during the initial stalking, and they failed her once again with the sentencing outcome. In a quest for justice, Celeste's family, friends, and supporters launched a campaign urging prosecutors to appeal Sako's sentence to secure life imprisonment. They marched from Parliament to the court. We're going to make this an annual event. We're not going away. We'll make it an annual event and ride for Celeste. They also set up an online petition advocating for a life sentence, which garnered over 12,000 signatures. Prosecutors echoed these sentiments by urging Justice Dixon of the Supreme Court to impose a life sentence. However, despite these efforts, Victoria's Office of Public Prosecutions announced that they would not pursue an appeal to challenge the 36-year sentence imposed on Sako. They expressed confidence in Justice Dixon's decision to imprison Sako until 2056 as an appropriate and just outcome. It's outrageous, absolutely unbelievable that the court decided to grant him mercy, even though he showed Celeste none. During the years before Sako's sentencing, Aggie engaged in meetings with various stakeholders, including state government officials. They made many promises to reform the system and honor Celeste's legacy. However, only a few of these promises had been followed through. Before Celeste's tragic murder, Aggie had little knowledge of the legal system, so she sought to educate herself about the processes that would follow. As she learned more, Aggie's frustration grew. She believed that the legislation was inadequate and failed to prioritize victims' needs. Driven by her grief, Aggie became an advocate for reforming what she viewed as a seriously flawed justice system. Her goal was to prevent senseless crimes like her daughter's murder from occurring in the future. Professor Troy McEwen, a psychologist specializing in stalking behavior, highlighted that the psychological impact of being stalked was often underestimated and poorly recognized within criminal justice systems. Celeste's murder also prompted the Victoria Law Reform Commission to launch an inquiry in 2021 into the state's stalking laws, which prompted some recommendations for reforms. Despite these recommendations, none have been fully adopted, much to Professor McEwen's frustration and disappointment. She cited cases where stalking victims were forced to change their identities and relocate to other states due to the severity of the threats they faced. She strongly believed that stalking was a deeply destructive crime that required urgent and comprehensive attention. 4 years after Celeste's murder, authorities developed a new assessment tool known as the Screening Assessment for Stalking and Harassment, or SASH. This tool consisted of a set of questions designed to help police identify high-risk stalking cases when victims first approach law enforcement. However, the implementation of this assessment tool had not been fully rolled out to every police station, an ongoing process that highlighted continued challenges in addressing stalking cases effectively. Victoria's Attorney General Jacqueline Symes viewed SASH as a crucial first step toward changing the system and committed to bringing about meaningful changes. She acknowledged the ongoing pain experienced by Celeste's family and loved ones and recognized their advocacy efforts in their daughter's memory. On Celeste's birthday, just days after her tragic murder, her older brother, Jaden, paid tribute to his sister. He shared that Celeste had eagerly anticipated seeing his baby daughter, Daisy, that week as pandemic restrictions were lifted. Outside Celeste's home, they created a makeshift shrine where dozens of people left floral tributes. The site became a place of remembrance adorned with cards, candles, picture frames, and teddy bears. Months after Celeste's passing, her final resting place remained adorned with flowers and tokens of love from those who cherished her. Aggie visited her daughter's resting site daily, finding solace in spending time with Celeste, even though she was 6 feet under. Louis Sacco is currently held in solitary confinement, preferring this isolation as he faces what is expected to be a lengthy prison sentence. Despite the constant disappointments, Aggie is still determined in her commitment to advocate for justice on behalf of her daughter. She vows to continue fighting to ensure that Celeste's legacy will drive meaningful changes in laws to protect stalking victims. I promised Celeste that I would get her justice one way or another. This is for literally every victim who has gone through a case like this, and we need to fight for all of them.